Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Well, guys, thank you for listening to this episode. We are excited today.
Yes, we are.
Look at this powerhouse of ladies here. We have all former Amish and Mennonite people who have left the Plain community, but still remain very connected to the Plain community to try to rescue victims in need. And I'm just going to go around and introduce everybody as you appear on my screen. So we'll begin with Misty Griffin. Hi, Misty. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to go to Mary, and then Jasper, and then Audrey.
So I left the Amish about 16 years ago. I joined from the outside when I was about 19 years old. And about 7 years after leaving the Amish, I wrote my memoir. And through that, I was able to reconnect with the Plain community and help several people. And now I'm working to help more, do whatever I can to help.
Very cool. Your memoir is excellent, by the way. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we have Mary Byler. Mary, welcome again. We've been on your podcast. So go ahead and plug your podcast and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Byler. I was born and raised Amish. I left the Amish in 2004. There was a lot of abuse that happened. I reported it. And today I have a podcast at the Misfit Amish YouTube channel. There's a couple different sections. We talk about disobedient women things, and we have coffee with friends. And Jimmy and Audrey have both been on that multiple times. We have another episode scheduled for July. Isn't that right?
That is right. We'll have to double check our dates again, because sometimes I get my days mixed up, Mary.
That's what happens when you're busy.
I know. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on our podcast. We're excited to have you. And Jasper, you're next. We have Jasper from the Plain People's Podcast. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, guys. So obviously my name is Jasper Hoffman, and I am the founder and producer of the Plain People's Podcast, which started in 2018, talking about survivor stories, really opening up the conversation between the English world and the Plain communities, and giving a voice for people to come forward and just really share their experience and their struggles and survival stories of fitting into the culture, the English culture. And through it, it really kind of became a major resource for people to start talking about abuse. I think people started feeling really comfortable about coming forward. I've really tried to shape it into educational conversations, not just exploitive tabloid type of situations, and really just trying to help the outside world see just how prolific the abuse is, as well as just the struggles for all of us that have left. I was in the Mennonite church, and then I left whenever I was 18. So it's been 20 years, and really just seeing the movement move forward within the last few years, as far as people and survivors coming forward, has just been really exciting. So I'm excited to be here.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. And your podcast has taken off like wildfire. Obviously you strike a chord with a lot of people who are either still in the Plain community or who have left. And so I commend you for that. And we were on an episode back in the day.
Yes, we were.
We were. Yeah. So, we'd love to have you again. There's just so many topics now that I want to cover. And
Yeah.
we'll get you guys back on for sure.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, we have Audrey Kaufman. Audrey does incredible advocacy work and just works tirelessly within the Plain community. She's very engaged, very plugged in. So Audrey, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And my name's, as you said, Audrey Kaufman, single mom of 5 kids. I've been out of the Amish community for quite a few years now and have brought my children out to safety as a survivor myself, and my children being survivors. It's been quite a journey. And along the way, I'm finding my own place in advocacy work and helping to free others. No one left behind.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Well, we have some questions, and we just jotted these down, and I sent you guys some questions before the podcast. So there's nobody particularly that we're going to ask these questions to. Like, they're not specific to your stories, but they are, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of growing up in a family of 11. I was the middle child, number 6 of 11. This is going to be kind of a free-for-all. It's like dinner time at the Hinton house.
I was the middle child, Jamie.
See?
Are you? Okay.
So
Yeah, you do.
It's the first come, first serve. You either get in there and attack, or you don't,
or you
don't
lose
eat.
out.
That's right. You lose out. So
you do.
We're gonna toss these out like they're little candy, these questions, and you guys just jump on it.
And we're all really mouthy, loud women.
We all have a voice. This is going to be entertaining.
Oh boy.
This will be fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of set it up this way for the entertainment factor. We just want to see you guys go at it.
That's the goal. That's what we're doing now. I have only one question. Are you reporting it back to my bishop?
Well, hey, what happens on the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast stays on the Sex Abuse podcast.
Oh. Much like the church. Wow.
See?
Much like my brother, what happens after dark stays in the dark.
So our listeners, I was just talking about this the other day with somebody, a sense of humor and a warped sense of humor is such a good coping mechanism, and every abuse survivor and advocate I know, we just have the most twisted sense of humor.
Yes.
So it's fantastic.
You have to.
We're in good company.
Survival. Yes.
I went out on a date this past winter, and it was with somebody, and we're talking, and he had a lot of childhood trauma that I didn't know about. So I came home and I texted my best friend. I was like, oh my God, he's actually funny. Like trauma funny.
There's only a special breed that gets that.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like, yes.
It's so true. It really is.
So all of my friends are trauma funny. we laugh about things. Yes.
Yeah. And it's real. Yeah.
Yes.
It's not, you don't find fakery in among abuse survivors and advocates.
Well, this morning I went out to look at my painting that I poured last night, and I wrote Jasper, and I said 2 moths committed suicide on my painting last night. What a shame.
Wow. Okay,
I said it's just goth moths.
I think we should have a ceremony later.
Wow.
I think too. I think it's necessary. So I want to ask this question to you guys, as somebody who obviously has never been part of the Plain community, but I worked with lots of Amish growing up. I was on Amish farms constantly. Got to know them at least on a superficial level. What do you guys want people like us to know about the Plain community and how easy it is to get away with abuse? Because what I saw was kindness, laughter, kids off in the background playing. Everybody looked just carefree, happy,
together, and
very polite. That's what I saw working with the Amish.
So
what do you guys want people to know?
My number one thing is is that what you see is exactly what they want you to see. You can have somebody like my stepfather literally sitting there and beating my stepbrother like with closed fists, chasing him with a stove poker, and then somebody who is English comes over and he turns around and says, "Good morning. How are you today? Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?"
Wow.
2 seconds. That's all it takes. You see exactly what they want you to see.
And was that consistent? I mean,
Yes.
yeah. Did you guys have the same experience? Misty, I read your memoir, and I mean, it's just grueling. Was that a consistency with what you saw too?
Oh, yes. After I was assaulted by the bishop, I thought about going to the neighbors that were close by that I'd known for several years. And I thought to myself, they're not going to believe me if I tell them what happened. They're never going to believe me because they just love the Amish neighbors so much. And thankfully, we had this lady that lived on our property, and I went to her for help. And, you know, still when I was going for help, I thought, you know, nobody's going to believe me because I knew that, you know, to the outside, the Amish present themselves as very kind, you know, hardworking, you know, all of those things you just said. And if you're an abuse victim and you want to go convince them otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. And after I did go to the police and the police came out, they reported back to the police station and they said, you know, they went out there, they saw these lovely children, you know, this kind family, and, you know, there was nothing, you know, nothing they could do to help me because it was my word against his. And, you know, they just didn't see anything wrong and didn't look like anything could possibly be wrong. But yeah, I mean, about 4 hours earlier, I mean, I had been violently assaulted, but, you know, the police didn't see anything like that.
Yeah.
Can I ask, like, do you think the clothing hid some of the signs of abuse?
On me, definitely. Like when I went to the police, I had bruises from my neck down below my waist. But because they were male officers and because, you know, I was Amish, you know, I never thought, you know, guys, look, here under my dress, here's some bruises you can see as evidence. And they never asked to look or look me over or anything like that. So
see, to
yeah,
me, that's so important for retraining our police forces. Like that's got to be essential.
Yes. I was walking evidence, but nobody thought to look for it.
I think that there's this perception in the communities where there's such a respect. So if the Amish or the Mennonites show favoritism towards you, let's say you're a neighbor and they're really nice and compassionate and maybe make you gifts, or you somehow feel like you're in, like they've accepted you. And I've seen this with detectives. I've seen this with so many people. Oh, well, you know, I've been really fostering a relationship with them for a really long time and I don't want to disrupt. That's such a manipulation on the Amish and Mennonites behalf. They don't want to be your friends. They don't want to connect with the outside world. So if they are being friendly, very oftentimes it's to hide something, which that sounds terrible because there are a few very genuine people, but generally they don't want you in their inner circle. They are not evangelists. They don't want friends on the outside world. And so if you're being hoodwinked in a way and romanticized in all of this, it's oftentimes to cover up something.
In my case, those neighbors that I was talking about, we would go and use their phone and they would take us to town. They didn't charge us. So our community was really nice to them because, I mean, wow, they really, like, they drove people to town, like almost every day they were driving, they were retired. So they were driving people into town, letting them come over and use the phone, and nobody ever paid for the, you know, the phone service. So, I mean, they thought our community was being really nice to them, but they were using them, like really using them.
There's such a sense of entitlement. And then like the English world needs to know that the Mennonites, and at least the Mennonites, slander and make fun of your kindness.
Yes.
Yes. Time. It is made fun of. It is looked down on. It is scorned on. They talk absolute garbage about you and how stupid you are. And there's just such this like elitist entitlement. So
you know what this sounds like to me? You know exactly what this sounds like to me?
Mean Girls, and that's why you can't sit with us.
Worse, prison. Like
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
hearing
Oh,
hearing you guys describe this, it sounds like so many conversations I've had with my dad, with corrections officers, friends of mine that work in the prison. And they're like, you know, these volunteers come into the prison. I listened to my dad leaning over, like I was visiting him in state prison, and he's mocking the visitors that come in. And he said, those people are so stupid. And he said, I should feel bad talking about them like that. But he's like, I can't help it. He's like, I can't believe that people are that naive. He's like, you know, when they come in, he said, never is our relationship with God more transparent and open. And he said, his words, he said, we really turn it on when the volunteers come. And he's like, and they're so stupid because they buy it. And then they use them, you know?
Did you
Yeah.
know? Did you know that like my first idea or thought that we were falsely imprisoned when we were growing up in abuse, like for me, was literally the prosecuting attorney told me that he felt like after hearing my story that I was falsely imprisoned throughout my childhood.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it's like
It's
this
like,
community,
this
as you
is-
guys describe it, it sounds like prison.
And
Like,
and yeah, and Jasper's right. Even Amish do that, where they will sit there and they will pretend to be like best friends with this woman, but behind her back, they're mocking her and calling her a whore and all kinds of things. Oh my God, Audrey, your neck is so exposed. I can almost see your chest. I just had to do it. You know, and my shirt's got some pink on it. Like, I'm just saying, but they do
Misty's
She's
that.
wearing
got some
red.
sparkles.
Yeah.
I mean, it might make you look at my boobs.
I just want to point out, though,
they're-
I just want to point this out, Mary, that out of all of us, Jasper and I are the most modest
Yes.
today.
Oh, really?
We really
How
are.
am I not
Yeah.
modest?
I mean, Jasper,
How come I
Wow.
can't be a part of this? Look at this. My
Y'all-
neckline's up here.
Y'all might be modest, but I'm vintage.
There you go.
You know, there's some good vintage stuff out there. I will give you that.
No,
So-
but back to the topic at hand. Like, I just experienced this again last night. Perfect example of scenario. So my next door neighbor is Amish. He's cousin to my ex-husband. He's been one of the worst as far as harassment goes. He's broken into my home. The list goes on. But so he it's a long story, but I put up a privacy fence. It's inside my property line, right?
Good for you.
So I knew exactly what was going to happen. He was going to use it as an animal boundary. That's what happened. And so last night, a friend of mine and his wife came over to go with me to approach him, because I knew approaching him by myself was going to be my word against his. And yeah, it wasn't going to be productive. So this friend is like, so what can I expect his reaction to be? And I'm like, oh, he'll be perfectly civil, maybe smirky grin. Like, that's just how these people do. Like, you'll never know there's a problem. And sure enough, we go over there. He's so glad to meet him. And he's, oh, absolutely. Anything we can
Wow.
do, like, oh, what's the problem? Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll take care of it next week. Is that soon enough for you? And I'm just sitting there going, you are such a fraud. You are such a fake. You are such a freaking liar. Like, the facade they put on to other people is just the gaslighting and the manipulation. I'm telling you, they are pros.
You know what's interesting to me about all this too? So I called a really good friend yesterday, and I won't give any details just to protect him, because he didn't give me permission to tell this story. But I call him up, or he called me. Like, we've been trying to schedule for a couple weeks and just hit and miss. And he calls me up, and the first thing he says, he's like, dude, he's like, I feel like I'm living in this bizarro world. He's like, I'm so pissed right now. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, I've been trying to get this contract with these Amish. And he's like, they are the slimiest people. He's like, I want a contract. I need material. He's like, I need my material. I need it to be consistent. They have really good prices. I just want a contract. I just want somebody to put in writing. He's like, but it's this evasive, like, oh yeah, buddy, we got your back. We'll work out a deal. And he's like, but they won't put anything on paper. And he's like, he's like, these people are such frauds. And he's like, he went off. And I was like, this is interesting timing. But he was just livid, and he's an abuse survivor himself. So he he can smell bullcrap a mile away.
Yeah.
But he's like, these people are so manipulative. He's like, it's insane. He's like, I just want a contract. That's it.
They are. The entirety of their culture is all about creating a society that is a dystopian, like some type of, have y'all ever seen Stepford Wives?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're all really great Stepford wives.
I'm so compliant, Jasper.
I am, and that's something that's important to point out with like all of us that have left. While it can be easy to say, and sit and talk about the manipulation and the coercion and how negative people are and how mean-spirited, please know that when we leave, we have that ingrained within us, and we work really, really hard to be kind, like learning how to be kind and all of these, to be empathetic and to really connect. For me personally, came very difficult. It has taken years to reprogram myself to not be that.
That was going to be a question from me, is how do you change the mindset? How do you change, what you grew up with? You were taught things that now you have to unteach yourself.
Yeah. And a lot of that also was backed up by my family unit. My father's extreme, he is just in that mindset and always has been, which is why he did so well within the community. And so really it took separating myself from my family and then also seeing like the pattern of who I used to be friends with. It's all this like very negative energy. And so slowly replacing that with people that I used to make fun of completely, that were like open-hearted and kind and consensual and caring and compassionate, all these things that are like, ew, you're weak, because there's such a what's the word that I'm looking for? Like they really exemplify hardness and toughness and not weakness. And so learning that it's okay to have those, it's taken putting myself in situations where I felt really uncomfortable and had to really work through that. And yeah, it's taken a long time, long time for me.
Jasper, I have a question for you. Would you say that not even just weakness, but anybody that shows, like if you show empathy or sensitivity to other people's needs, like they look down on that too? And then isn't there also an element of like, I don't know about the Mennonites, but for my Amish community, like they didn't teach us like safe touch and non-safe touch, and there was no form of like consensual touch that we experienced as children.
Right.
There was the abuse. So learning to hug people, learning to knock on doors before you enter a room, and waiting for a response. Like those are things that I didn't know. I didn't know any of those things. And for me, like Jasper said, put yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah,
and it's
slowly over time and replacing, and just it comes with a lot of sadness though, because you have to let go of a lot of people in your past because they exemplify those, and all of a sudden it becomes really polarizing and uncomfortable to be in those conversations anymore around negative people or people that want to drag people down. That's something that I've experienced, and it's like, this doesn't feel good. So there is a level of grieving that goes with it. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But it can be done, but I think it just takes time, and it takes an understanding. And the biggest thing is what I found very helpful is to not be friends with ex-plane people for a long time. Like, because there is such a negative mindset still that's there. It's true. I mean, so why are we going to learn from people that have just gone through the same dysfunction as we? Like, you're incapable of doing that. But I see a lot of people still staying in the cliques. They just move the cliques out into the real world. So I think for all of us, like, having friends that are outside of the community, learning how social structures are set up and how people show compassion, and like really kind of learning how to read the room is really, really crucial in order to learn new habits and learn a new mindset.
I think
that's
go ahead.
No, I was just going say I think it's different for each of us. I think it's a little different for all of us. For me, it wasn't so much the compassion part, because that was what always got used against me, was the fact that I was exceptionally compassionate and empathetic, and I refused to hurt people the same way I was hurt. But what has been challenging for me then is to enter the real world and learn to understand who's safe and who isn't, because it's a completely different culture.
Right.
And while I can identify in the culture that I was in who was safe and who was unsafe, it was a real challenge for me to move out into a culture that I didn't understand and learn a whole new lifestyle, and then determine who's safe and who's unsafe. So, and I've also found, like Jasper said, the whole negative mindset, it's been helpful for me to step out and make new friends outside of that, and retrain my brain and retrain just my mindset as a whole, because you need both.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
And I will say this, I so agree, because learning who's safe and unsafe on the outside world is very difficult. Like, especially as females, learning with men, like how to be treated. That's a huge learning curve. And unfortunately, we have to go through like some really bad experiences that people would probably, like, I look back and I'm like, why would I ever put myself in this situation with this person? But I just didn't know. And so it can be dangerous too, emotionally and physically in those learning experiences.
And I've found for myself, like within the community, there's so much shame on us women, like so much shame. And so for me, one of the big things coming out was to separate myself. I could separate myself from that shame. But then when I merged into the real world, and there was things that I missed, and places that I made mistakes, or friends that hurt me, or people that were dangerous, then that I didn't shame myself for that. And just, look, this is a learning curve. I'm learning as I go. It's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
So
wow.
do you guys-
Let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about, the abuse. A lot of the abuse came from family members and from friends. Why is it that the abuse was so normalized within the community?
So you have to look at the social structure of what's allowed. So in the Mennonite communities, you are not allowed to hang out or to spend time alone with the opposite sex unless they are related to you. So your cousins are safe. You can drive in the car with your cousins, but not your neighbor boy. And the same with your brothers. So it's really fostered originally that somehow those that are close to you are safe. So you're left alone, much more than somebody that's not related to you.
I'm going to read you a passage from the book Ignorance is Bliss, which I bought at the Amish Abuse Awareness Conference in Loganton, PA. A big downfall is for children of different families to be together too much. They will get to know each other too well and will become bold with each other. That is ideal breeding ground for impure conduct of one form or the other. Children just simply don't have any business spending that much time together. They would be much better off at home under the supervision of their parents. End quote. There is no author. It's published by Pathway Publishers.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's
the kind of stuff
that's the
taught in church.
foundational. Yeah, that's the foundational premise of why you're more comfortable with somebody. I mean, I think there's other contributing factors which these ladies can go into, but for me, I feel like that's something that's really important to point out.
It's the whole isolation, and like even within the community, like if you're not considered, because there's a whole caste system, you have to look at the community structure in the first place, because you have at the head of it, you have the bishop, then you have the 3 ministers, and then you have the deacon. That's at least in every Amish church I lived in. And then there's always like after that, like the structure is the elders, like the aldelet, right? So the old people, like they're considered to know more. And so we should always listen to them and obey them. And then after that, you have the younger men, but it always goes by the men. Like the ministry is all men. Everything is only men. And then finally, once you get to like the women and children, like there's nothing left. But then you kind of have this ladder. So there's people who contribute lots of money. They pay a lot of hospital bills. They pay a lot of whatever it is. And they kind of take care of like the less fortunate. It doesn't matter like how well they take care of the less fortunate, but at least they didn't die, I guess.
Hmm.
At least I didn't die. Okay.
Wow.
I mean, they can sit in their wonderful house and eat their wonderful food, but we'll throw you some liver and, you'll stay alive and you'll be good. Right.
Mhm.
So either way, like there's people that do certain things and so they become elevated on that social structure. If like, for example, some people that are married but don't have children, like they will go down that ladder. And then some people, they never marry and they will also like go down that ladder. Some
Mhm.
people, did I say don't have children already?
Yeah, but it's scalable because then you can
Yes, like
adopt
it
Black
just-
children, and then all of a sudden you're doing
Yes.
the world a huge service, and so then
Mhm.
you go up the ladder a little bit because
Okay.
now
Yes.
you've opened your home up to these poor, unfortunate children
But
that
those-
needed you.
But
So
those Black children are going to be down at the bottom of the social
Right.
ladder because they're
Right.
Black and
because they're Black,
because
yeah,
they
and
weren't
adopted.
born into
And they're
it.
not allowed
They're
to
not.
marry, like at least in this community, they're not allowed to marry in the community. So, I mean,
Yeah.
so much service.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they'll normally marry somebody that is of a lower class, and then it creates another lower class family. Then those children struggle. The only way that they can move up is if they marry up.
But they can't marry up because they're not from
Yeah.
good stock.
Wow.
Yeah, unless you
Well,
like
here-
maybe find
here they're
somebody.
not- Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, unless you're fortunate enough to find somebody that's maybe in a situation where they need a wife, or
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, here in this Amish community, they're not even allowed to marry within the church. So I don't know what they expect them to do. I don't understand the whole process of why you would even adopt them to begin with if they're never allowed to marry.
for work and social
Work.
status. Come on, Audrey.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No,
Work,
I know.
and they
but
gotta
I'm
climb
just
up the
saying-
ladder.
Oh, I know. I understand how it works, but I'm just logic the end result, but we all know they don't think things through logically.
Yeah.
One, I think that's too where you enters the whole piece of, this is another important piece, is the way they view sex. I mean, it's dirty, it's shameful. Women and children are owned. They're not autonomous. They're pieces of property. And everyone is considered evil from the time they're born. So why wouldn't these children just automatically do bad things? I mean, it's all born into us. We're all just inevitably going to be evil. So we expect it to happen. And so women and children aren't prized and cared for and protected. They're something to use. It's the power and control dynamic, and then the way they look at sex as a whole, it just feeds into it and creates a very volatile ticking time bomb.
So Audrey, what?
I would like to add something to that about the like the abuse aspect. The house that I was living in, there was stuff going on, between the brothers and the sisters. And I was always curious because it would happen right in front of the mother. Like I believe there was worse stuff happening that wasn't happening in front of us, but there was stuff happening right in front of us, a few feet in front of us. And I was always curious why the mom didn't just, grab the boy by the ear and like take him outside and, talk to him or something. Why didn't she do anything? She never did anything. And, the only thing she would ever do was like tell the daughter to get back to work or something like that. So after I left, I was chatting with these two ex-Amish guys. And, I was like, why do you think that the mom never said anything? Because I saw it in other families, like very open, just brothers and sisters, just, the sisters being abused. It was so obvious. And I was like, why didn't anybody ever do anything? I couldn't do anything. Nobody would listen to me. I was a married girl. So these guys, they had abuse in their families, their brothers and their fathers and everything. And they said they had the impression growing up that it was allowed in the families because it kept the boys occupied. They said it sounds horrible, but if these Amish boys don't entertain themselves with their sisters, they're going to look elsewhere. They're going to start looking at other girls in the community. They're going to start looking outside of the community for girls. They're just going to look for other, women elsewhere. So they said they felt growing up that it was allowed to keep, if there was a pregnancy, it was handled within the family. There was no scandal, that kind of thing. That sounds awful, but that was their impression. And it makes a little bit of sense, because why else wouldn't the parents say anything? Like, why wouldn't they just put a stop to
I
it?
mean, that's a twisted form of view that Sheila Gregoire talked about.
Right.
She wrote The Great Sex Rescue, and she said in the conservative religious world, it's taught that men are these animalistic, sex craved, sex deprived. They need it. They have to have sex, and if they don't, then if they're being deprived at home, then the next target is fair game. They can have sex with kids, with what I mean. Like, it's this twisted view of sex that's just really bizarre. Go ahead.
Well, and that's like in my marriage. I mean, that's what I was told for years. Well, he must not be getting it, like they're going to go somewhere to find it. So you have to give it to them. Men, it reduces men to animals, which is sad, because they're so much more than that.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's the mindset then that men have, that they just view that that's of course their sin nature. So how can they rise above that? That's never shown to them. Instead, it's like, how can you control your sin nature, and how can you control your predatory behavior, instead of being told, hey, this is not actually who you are. Let's,
you're actually not going to die if you don't have sex. Like, it won't.
And one of the ways that they also could put that narrative out there is by making, like, for example, if a man were to have an erection, for example, looking at a woman or whatever, they would automatically blame the woman for that. Like, it's automatically as if there's no way for him to control himself. Like, they don't have to act on that. There's no need to act on that.
Right.
But they don't even give them the respect to say, you can control yourself. Right. Just because this happens.
Or the respect to know how science works. So the fact that sometimes you just can't control that, and that's just a bodily function,
and it just happens.
Like, there's no sin involved. It just happens. Like, they cannot explain that in that, because then they would actually have to understand how your body autonomy works and how science works, and introduce all of these things it's just easier to slap the label of sin on it. And then you have a reason to constantly keep the church going, in my opinion. What are you going to talk about after 300 years? You've got to find something to continually talk about. So an erection is not going to go away. So, okay, well, let's just pin it on that one.
Well, and the shape of women's bodies is not going to go away either. So we have to talk about that. And that's why it's so important. If your shot's been your apron string is like 1/4 of an inch too thick, you best be fixing it, or you might be up there confessing.
Yeah, it's marketing. That's all it is. It's just marketing. They're just regurgitating the same material. That's what Mary and I discovered when we went to the abuse seminar last month. We're sitting there, and it's like, I literally at one point quoted before what he quoted the scripture he was going to say, because I'm like, this is the same stuff. It's just been rebranded a little bit. They've updated their branding colors, but that's it.
And then I would like to add to that, Jasper. It's also, it's like, it's the same stuff. It's rebranded a little bit, but it's also like, this is now 17 years later for me, and you're still talking about the same stuff and using the same things to silence people, and it's worse than I remembered.
Yeah, it's very theatrical.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.